When you're a part of sneaker culture, there are certain behaviors that have now become norms over time. And I'm going to talk to you about some of them and about how I broke one of them, this time on Fire Footwear. Welcome back to Fire Footwear, everybody. As always, this is your host, Matt Frates. I hope that this finds you well, and I want to thank each and every one of you for coming back to this podcast. At the top, I do need to apologize for one, not coming out with content last week. I honestly wanted to let some things marinate in my mind, and I think in today's sneaker culture, specifically in sneaker content, I feel like a lot of us creators have much of the same topics to sort of cycle through. And as you know, I like to bring a unique perspective. And while I don't always do that, it's something I strive to do. And so as I was looking at what I wanted to do last week, also with some time constraints and then getting sick on top of it, which I'm sure you can hear about, I really didn't feel like I had something worthy of this pod. So I waited a little bit. And along the way, I had an experience that kind of shaped differently what I wanted to talk about this week. And so I talked at the top about sneaker norms. If you've been in the culture long enough, you know that there are certain aspects and certain behaviors of being embedded in the culture for real that sort of come part and parcel with it. And I believe that over time, most of us have accepted the idea that these are norms that we need to conform to, that they're activities or behaviors that we need to subscribe to. Because if you look at sneaker culture in general, there's a lot of tribalism. A lot of people feel that you need to experience the culture their way, or that you need to live the culture the way that so-and-so tells you to. And what I believe is that there are more than one ways to skin a cat, and that means there are more than one ways, infinite ways really, to live in sneaker culture. Some people have been in it a long time, and so they experience it one way. Some people have been in it a short amount of time, and they experience it another way. And even within those two groups, you find different subcultures of people who experience things differently. It depends on where you live geographically. It should depend on where you are socioeconomic wise. And I think that today, though, in sneaker culture, and I think this really comes from social media, and I think it comes from peer pressure in general of this is what you should do, hard stop. People feel as if the culture is one way, and it's not one size fits all. And as I started thinking about that, this whole thing reformed because of something that I did in my personal life that really relates to this pod. And I'm going to tell you about that later as I list out some of these activities that I listed off as I was trying to very generally prepare for this episode. And I think it's impactful. And it does relate to some other content that I've done. If you've listened long enough, you know that I did an episode about sneaker culture behaviors. And that really comes down to buying behaviors. And then I also did an episode at the beginning of this year about sneaker resolutions. And one of the resolutions that I made for myself, which I have been living, is to cop less and enjoy more. Now, I think it's extremely important for me to say that listing out these activities is not a way of shaming anybody who does them, or all of them. The idea is to get you to think a little bit differently. And even if you don't want to change anything about how you experience and live in the culture, that's fine. You know me, you do you. And that works best for you is what you should always do. I do that for myself. And sometimes on this pod, I translate that into something that I think you would like to know. But what you do with it from here is really none of my business. I just think that you should think about it differently, and then you can act accordingly if you want. But this is in no way of throwing shade or shaming anybody who does these. So let's talk about some of these activities. The first one, copying just because the culture is copying or that your friends are copying. This is pretty rampant in the culture. There are so many sneakers that come out every single week, every single month, every single year. I did an episode about early looks and how I felt like they might be ruining the appeal of sneakers well before they ever come out. But what ends up happening is no matter how much hate a shoe gets online, once the copying day comes, a lot of people want to cop. Now, I myself just recently went through this a little bit because I kind of thought based off of my financial patterns recently that I was going to be out on the Air Tech Challenge too. But then when it came down to it, I realized I only wanted 3 shoes this entire year, and this was one of them. So I went out for them. It didn't have anything to do with the fact that anybody else wanted them. It came down to, this is what I had set for myself for the year, and so I should go for them because I have already set aside money for this endeavor. And so I copped. But a lot of people feel that they can't say that they don't want something. And I just want to say that it's okay to look at a shoe and say, that's not for me. And I'll give you a personal example. The black cement 3s that are coming out this year, almost everybody is amped for them if you don't already have a pair. I myself have owned a pair in the past, and I'll be honest, it's not one of my favorite Jordans of all time. I think it's a little bit overrated. Do I understand where it is in the culture? 100%. But it's not one of my favorite shoes. And so just because the culture is hyped for it, it doesn't mean that I have to also be hyped for it. And so that's a behavior that I think is very rampant. And I think it's very difficult to get out of that mentality because peer pressure exists and peer pressure is powerful. And then when you cop these shoes, I think social media has conditioned us to feel like we have to have a certain fit to go with these shoes. You have to dress a certain way. You have to have a certain look to you when you are part of sneaker culture. I joke a lot on this podcast that I am not a sharp dresser. I don't look bad by any means, but I dress what is appropriate for the way that I look and the way that I think that I am. And so when you look at me, I say that I'm Kirkland chic because yes, many of my clothes come from Costco. I don't have a sense of fashion that extends into the realm of high fashion. I don't do a lot of coordinating. My coordinating is very rare and it works for me. My dress is very simple, but my shoes are always fire. And so to me, that's how I live the culture. But I think people feel like, oh, you have to have Supreme, you have to have all the streetwear brands, you have to have certain pants to wear with certain Jordans. And while maybe some people you think don't look good with the way that they style their shoes, it works for them. And you should always stay true to yourself. And so I think that a lot of people feel pressure to look a certain way when it comes to how they style their shoes. But really, you should do it in a way that stays true to yourself and that stays authentic to who you are and how you want to present yourself. This next one kind of goes hand in hand with what I talked about when it came to copying, just because the culture is copying. But I think that there is this need from people that have been in the culture for a long time that you need to respect and like all of the OG Jordans. And while many of the OG Jordans are fire, and they certainly have a place in history and have helped us to get to where we are today, doesn't mean that you have to like them. It doesn't mean that you have to cop them. And my Black Cement 3 example is perfect for that. Or even if you go into some Jordan 6s, Jordan 7s, Jordan 8s, I don't like a lot of the OG colorways in those models. And it's because it doesn't fit my aesthetic. But what ends up happening, I've noticed, is that when an OG colorway is dropping, so many people tell you that you have to have, it's a must cop. And it can be a must cop for you because you like that shoe, but it isn't a must cop just because it's an OG Jordan. And a lot of times the execution of those OG colorways in today's market doesn't fit what I feel should be the quality of them. Let's take the reimagined Jordan 4s for a minute. The black and reds are just iconic to me. They don't have to be iconic to everybody, but I have told you and continue to believe that the reimagined version is a better execution of that model. And I feel like the materials on the original, the 1989 original, really don't match with what should be today's quality because we can do a lot better. And yes, it's cool to have something in almost the way that it was when it first originated, but that doesn't mean we have to keep it. It doesn't mean that we have to keep the same standards in terms of comfort as well. And you know, I've complained about that. And so it's okay if you're a younger person and you don't like the OG colorways. You don't have to. It just means that you aren't going to cop them, but you should respect where they are and how they got us here. And I think that's always important. Another one that I hear a lot, and I think maybe has more validity than some of these others, is only wearing certain shoes or certain colorways during certain seasons. Now, I know that a lot of people, when it comes to styling their fit, and that gets to one of the earlier ones that we already discussed, is you try to style yourself in a way that sort of fits the season. But let's be honest, we can't have a wardrobe that size that's going to allow us to do that every single time. And while there are shoes that speak to certain times of year, especially brighter colors make you think of summer, certain colors make you think of the beach, certain colors make you think of fall. Talk about your burgundies and your dark tans, dark oranges. And while I understand that aesthetic, I feel like there's very few shoes that actually are meant for a certain season. I think winterized shoes are in that realm. Obviously, if they are holiday related, so let's think about Halloween related, Christmas related, something like that, they make more sense to wear them in the time frame that they have sort of been pinned down to because of how they are designed. But there are a lot of general releases that come out that people say, this is perfect for fall, or I'm only going to wear this in spring. And to me, that seems very limiting because now you're taking your collection and everybody has a different size collection and you're pinning it down to, well, I can only wear these things here and these things there. And to me, that seems a little bit too limiting. It doesn't go with what I want to do, which is enjoying my shoes more. And it doesn't fit in line with wearing your shoes. I get collecting. And if you're a collector, it's a little bit of a different story. And really, I'm speaking to people who want to wear their shoes. Wear them whenever you want. That I think is very important. And if there are certain shoes that you want to save for certain times of year, by all means do that. But don't limit yourself just because the culture in general tells you that you can only wear this in the fall or that you should only wear this at certain times. No, you can wear them whenever you want. And I think the freedom in being able to do that, it makes you feel better. So do what makes you happy. And when it comes to wearing our shoes, let's talk about that for a minute. Because I think that the culture has gotten into this space where it's not cool to wear your shoes too much. What do I mean? Not creasing your shoes. Not creasing your shoes is something that almost every sneakerhead believes in. And I do believe, though, that it isn't everybody, because I don't believe in this at all. Creasing your sneakers, yes, does take away some of the aesthetic pleasure that other people will get of looking at your shoes. And I think you also are losing out on that a little bit as well. Creases are imperfections. They make you think that your product, whatever it is now less than it was than the time before you wore it. And I don't believe that. I believe that creases are love. I believe that when you wear your shoes and you see wear on them, it means that you love them. And that's the way that I interpret creases. That's the way I interpret dirt. Do I wash my shoes occasionally? Absolutely, because there are certain stains or certain things that you want to get out of it because you want to preserve it looking nice for as long as possible. But creases are something that are just almost impossible to get rid of. And it's to the point now where I feel like people will change their gait, change the way that they walk so that their shoes don't crease. I hear stories about young people putting these inserts into their shoes to make sure that they don't crease. So not only are they changing the way that they walk, but they're now changing the comfort level of these shoes just so people don't make fun of them for having creases. And to me, that's absurd. It's insane. And what's the point of that? What's the point in doing that when the only thing you're really going for is somebody not making fun of your shoes having creases? Again, to me, creases are a love language for shoes. Shoes are a commodity unless you're collecting them, but if you're wearing them, it's a love language, and I believe that creases show that you do love them. And so when people see pictures of my shoes or they see them, they're like, man, bro, those are all creased up. And it's like, yeah, you know why? Because they're very well loved. And I'm somebody who's a big proponent now of wearing your shoes. And when you're done with them, no matter how much you paid for them in resale, no matter how much they mean to the culture, say goodbye, because that's what you should do. There will always be another shoe to come around. And the way that Nike is working now, they seem to all be opening the vaults like crazy. And so I think it's very important that crease your shoes, man. It's not that big of a deal. And this gets to the last one, and probably not the only one. Like, this is not an all-encompassing list, but this last one is the one that I recently did. And it's all about keeping your boxes. I think if you're a collector and you need some sort of inventory method, there is a method to the madness of keeping your boxes. But recently in the room that I record this content, I looked around and realized that it was cluttered, that I was getting to almost hoarder status. Not really, but there was so much clutter up here because of things that were taking up space that allowed it now to flow into the floor. And I looked around and I realized what was causing this. And what was causing this was keeping my shoe boxes. Full disclosure, in my closet downstairs, I have those clear cases that I put my shoes in. They do not sit in the boxes. And I've been keeping boxes thinking, well, if I ever want to sell a shoe, or maybe having some attachment to the box because of where it came from or how old the shoe is or whatever. When in the reality, for me, keeping the boxes was an act of futility. It wasn't doing anything for me. And so I did something that people are going to think of as blasphemous. And when I say it out loud, you may even have an audible reaction. I destroyed and threw away all of my boxes. Haven't thrown them away just yet, but they are sitting crushed not too far from where I'm sitting. And they will be gone by the end of the weekend. And I'm going to tell you, it was freeing. It was freeing to take all of these boxes that I felt conditioned to keep for one reason or another and to get rid of them. And the reason it was freeing is because I realized now I'm committed to wearing these shoes. And whenever these shoes are done and the life is out of them, I will throw them away. And I will do so very peacefully, very freely. It doesn't mean you have to do that too, but keeping the boxes, when you really think about it, is kind of futile. And for some people, the boxes represent the whole collection of the shoe. But again, if you're a collector, it's one thing. But if you aim to wear all of these, unless you need the boxes for inventory, the boxes really aren't doing anything for you. You don't wear them. Nobody really ever sees them. And so for me, I realized that keeping them doesn't do anything for me. It actually is holding me back. It's holding me back from enjoying. It's holding me back from truly loving my shoes. And so I crushed them and got rid of them. And there were some iconic boxes in there, let me tell you. Some of those OG Jordan boxes are just straight fire. They're gone now, or they will be very soon. And it felt very, very freeing. And I encourage everybody listening to think about all of these. How many of them do you do? How many of them do you think may be holding you back? And maybe think about changing them. Don't necessarily change it because I tell you, but maybe change it because it'll better your life in some way. And that's all that I want you to think about. But before we get to the end, and this is ironic, but I still want to talk about a release of the week. Release of the week, where I like to highlight a shoe that catches my eye. It's not always hype, and that's the important part. It's just something that I want you to know about. So September 13th, a week from now, Pata is releasing a re-release of their now renowned Air Max 1 Chlorophyll. And this is a hype shoe for a lot of people. It's a return of a classic. And the iteration of it this time around, we don't know what kind of quality it's going to be. It's a straight up Air Max 1. Obviously, it has the Pata branding and so forth on it. It's an iconic colorway. And for people who've been in the culture long enough, this is something that you must have. And sure, go for it. But don't feel like you have to just because it's old. If you don't like it, don't buy it. But if you want it, September 13th is the time to get it. I'm not going to go for it because it's not something that I have an emotional attachment to. It doesn't look all that much different than some of the other Air Maxes that I already have. And so I'm going to enjoy what I have and be happy with it. But I wish you the best of luck if you are going for it. How do you feel about some of these sneaker norms? And do you feel like maybe some of them are worth breaking? Let me know. Instagram at Fire Footwear Pod is the handle if you want to reach me there. If you want to call the Fire Footwear voicemail line and let me know about some of these, the number is area code 202-643-9170. And that is an American number for all of my international listeners. I know you're out there. If you want to get in touch with me via email, firefootwearpod@gmail.com is the way to do so. We're on TikTok. We're on YouTube. We're all over the audio space. Subscribe, like wherever it is that you find this content, wherever you enjoy it. And I'm just happy to be able to bring it to you. I hope this finds everybody well. I hope this finds everybody safe as I always do. And I will talk to you next week, hopefully with a better voice. This is Fire Footwear. The opinions and viewpoints expressed on Fire Footwear are those of Matt Frates and his guest, and not necessarily those of the Matty Ice Media Network. Fire Footwear is exclusively owned by Matt Frates and is brought to you by the Matty Ice Media Network.